Great. Just to give everybody kind of an overall context, north on this plan is to the right. Carpenter Street is down along the bottom of the page, and Water Street is to the left. Church Street is just off the screen on the right-hand side here. And you can see from Harrison Street up here, the dead end, Beaver Brook is running along kind of the top of the page here. So starting off, I'm going to start with number 1 up in the upper left here with the Cheshire Rail Trail and work my way counterclockwise until we get kind of back to Carpenter Street. So first, one of the things that we thought would be important is to add some wayfinding signage to the Cheshire Rail Trail in the location of the basketball courts. So if you are riding a bike by, you're alerted that, hey, there's this really great park right down the street, and you can access that park by walking along the existing sidewalk on Water Street. We also identified that we would need a new sidewalk connection for accessibility that runs along the corner here of Water Street and Carpenter Street. As we get down to the lower left-hand page, lower left here, you can see identified number 3, in which we would be proposing some coordination with the existing building owner to use this parking for overflow parking during events or game days. Let me zoom in here a little bit. Okay, as we make our way from this overflow parking, we're proposing to, again, work with the existing property owner on this existing structure to add photovoltaic cells to the roof so that we can include some of that energy for lighting. Oh, let me admit Carly, as well as security cameras if need be. Facing the field here, as you can see in pink, there's a large blank wall that would make a really great location for a potential mural on this building. Would require some additional coordination with the property owner. As you're coming up Carpenter Street, there's an existing telephone pole here. This is where we would really start to introduce our gateway and branding signage on that pole that you're entering Carpenter Field and the park. We have a new entrance, which is just on the southern side of the property line, which takes us into what would be additional coordination with this property owner for potential overflow parking. I believe there's approximately 23, 25 spaces within this lawn overflow parking area, but obviously would have to be coordinated with the owner. As we move along Carpenter Street, we have formalized some of the existing parking, keeping some of the existing linden trees to remain, which are identified with this kind of transparency green color. And within those areas, we would be adding curb and infiltration, small rain gardens in these areas. To increase overflow parking, we've included a double stacked parking area. Ideally would be used for players on game days who would be okay with being blocked in if they're teammates. Ideally, the front half of this could be gravel so that on non-game days it doesn't look out of place, just being asphalt. Then all of the other parking spaces along Carpenter Street would be asphalt, pitched into these open rain garden areas with high level overflow structures that would then go to the storm drain. One of the elements of this project is looking at the existing underground storm pipe that currently runs straight out to Beaver Brook. In this concept, we would be capturing those storm pipes and relocating them to the southwest here, to the lower end of the field, and creating a sediment basin for these, which would also be a site feature planted with meadow grasses and native perennials with a small overflow, cobble overflow that then goes into Beaver Brook. This pipe, as you can recall, takes on a significant amount of stormwater from the adjacent neighborhood to the east. So we'd be providing this stormwater element so that we can help with water quality and treat some of that. So at 43 here, we have our main entrance into the park. We would have bollards and drop curb for handicap accessibility, existing hydrant, I believe, to remain. This would be a location for bike racks, and just adjacent to that would be our handicap and van accessible parking areas. If we move from this area to the east, to the west, we move into a large plaza space. In this plaza space, we envision having a large sculpture, and then as well as benches within the potential paver plaza. And then identified as 54, we would have a series of columns or colorful banners that create that backdrop to the sculpture, and with some movement with those banners would bring some life right as you're entering into the field. Now, as a backdrop and center line to this sculpture, if you follow this dashed line all the way up, we have a small open-aired shade pavilion, which would essentially be the backdrop view to this sculpture. That's important because if you're entering the site, there's a lot going on. You've got the sculpture, you've got the branding, flagging, moving around. And as you move around the sculpture and look across the field, which many times won't be striped, will just be this open lawn, you identify this architectural feature in the foreground, which subconsciously tells you, oh, I got to make my way around this park and see what else is out here. Moving past the sculpture, we have a series of wood guide rails or decorative fencing that would create that visual barrier from Carpenter Street into the field. And moving over to the left here, we also have that small barrier here, and then a series of small seating areas. These are essentially like little chill nodes that could have hammocks in them. They could have wood block seating. Great place for families to gather on game day. But even when it's not a game day, and let's say a family comes here, it's a great place to hang out, put down your cooler while the kids are playing on the field and moving around our walkway, which runs around the entire field. The walkway, identified as 10, makes its way completely around the open lawn area, and has a series of really interactive elements and view sheds that you will encounter as you make your way around the trail circuit. It's a 10-foot wide multi-use trail. And along this area is where we have number 45, which is our shade bleacher area. This would be our main bleacher area centered on the field that would have a shade canopy over it. Spectators from both teams would be sharing this bleacher system, but spectators can also bleed off into the element identified as number 16, which is a series of really large, squared, sanded, tree trunks essentially that could be stacked, that make a really great place for sitting and watching a game, but also part of that kind of child experience as kids are moving along the pathway. You can envision them getting on the logs, balance beaming, jumping off, running to the next one, doing the balance beam, and so forth. If we make our way here, moving to the right, our pathway comes down here past additional parking along Carpenter Street and begins to turn the corner. At this point, you have access to two parking spaces, here identified as number 42, or direct access onto lawn area. You could beeline it, taking a left-hand turn through lawn, past a butterfly garden, identified as number 15, and into an open playground area identified as number 35. This would double as a picnic area. You can see these small little picnic benches that would have a shade sail structure over them, as well as the location for playground elements. The play area is enclosed with fencing so that we could keep little tykes in. And our walkway moves around here, and you'll notice this access road identified as 39. This could be an emergency access onto the trail. The trail is wide enough, I believe it's 12 feet wide, so that an emergency vehicle can make its way on a paved trail around the entire site. This is also a really great place for any patrol cars. if they do need to station themselves in the park, they can easily go through these gates and park just behind this brown structure. If you're walking on the pathway here and you enter 36, this is an open plaza area with, again, stone or log seating elements. That would be a great area to sit while you're waiting to use the bathroom. This is the proposed bathroom facility location in concept 1 with an attached storage structure identified as 38 for any rugby equipment that needs to be stored. Just as a backdrop to this area, for added screening to the neighbor to the north, we've added a really large planting of flowering berry producing bushes to create some additional habitat enhancements, and then place some bluebird boxes within those. We envision the bluebird boxes to be all different with a little architectural, artistic design to them. You could imagine different color bluebird boxes on poles that are just springing up out of the berry producing shrubs. 53 identifies additional shrub planting along the entire northern property line. This would include additional coordination with the property owners, but would be a benefit to them. One, it would provide additional screening during the spring, summer, and fall months, but then also provide that understory vegetative element to the existing overstory trees here. If we move from the bathroom back onto our trail, you'll notice a little change in texture in the walkway that identifies movement between the playground and our 36 plaza structure. As we move up our walkway here, we're really getting into an activated space here. Up at 33, again, textured pavement that delineates 2 separate use areas. On the left-hand side, we have an open-air pavilion with different types of seating around it. Could be low chairs and tables, could be high-top bistro seating with tables along the field of play, which is delineated with a fence, chain link fence or a decorative fence of that nature. Additionally, on each ends of this fence and the plaza, we could erect some flag poles as well. This plaza is really great for any gathering space, any events that require a large number of people. We've also included some stone seating, almost amphitheater style seating. So if there is a presenter in the open air pavilion, there is an area for participants to sit and listen to the speaker on both sides. On this side, this could also double as seating with tables just running around this area. If we move back to the north and go across our pathway, we have another plaza with a pergola, shade pergola structure just above it. We could grow vines on this pergola structure. We envision the columns of this pergola to be downlit with very small lighting. So there is lighting in this area, as well as an area for charging stations. So you have USB ports. So if you do need to charge your iPad or your phone, this would be a great location. Underneath this pergola would be movable, small, cafe style, colorful chairs and tables. And then further on, a bocce ball court for some of the seniors and adjacent residential complexes to come over. That's one of the things we heard. Now, anchoring on the west and the east side of the bocce plaza, as we'll call it, are 2 smaller little seating areas that have 4 trees planted in them. And we envision a pea gravel placed in these 2 areas. This kind of brings in that Paris feel where you're underneath a canopy of flowering trees, really mellow, just relaxing in the shade in the summertime, having your coffee on your phone. It's also a nice relaxing area during game day that you can move and relax with your family while your kids are playing on the playgrounds. If we move further to the west here, you can see the other small little grove of trees and seating area and 2 additional play areas just to the west here. If we move up the page a little bit, we are proposing a new pathway to run just to the north here and pick up the existing location of the existing trail, which makes its way up to Harrison Street. At the Harrison Street bridge, we'd be proposing signage for the park that identifies that you can take this pathway, which would be paved ADA accessible, and would potentially identify not only wayfinding to the park, but this could be a location for park rules, letting people know immediately what is allowed and what is not allowed in the park. One of the things that we identified as part of our site visit was that this area here is heavily used for potential, you know, not the best activities, I think, as we've talked in the past. So we would be proposing a new fence to block off the link, which runs from 49 out to Church Street. There's an existing pathway here. So the fence line runs along the entire north property line. Now, we've got some pretty interesting stream channel features that we think are really going to be improvements. Currently, as you are probably aware, the stream channel runs down and just makes an immediate beeline to the south here. And so this bank here gets a lot of velocity and impact to it. And what happens is it doesn't do any benefit to the stream channel. As water is slamming down here in floods, it's taking this right-hand turn and continuing on. And so we want to do a couple things. We want to slow down that water, and we're doing that by regrading this area to create a micro floodplain. So the grading comes all the way out to here and comes all the way back here. So all of this area in here is essentially maybe 12 inches above the existing water elevation, so that during floods, we're kind of relieving some of the pressure and allowing these floodwaters to spill out into this 18 area. But we still want to provide access down to it. This area would be planted with sedges and rushes and native perennials that could be inundated with water. And so we want to allow people to get down there. So we have a pathway that runs down to a small little gathering spot where you can actually get down and touch the water. It's retained with some boulders. We're also placing boulders and some new shrub vegetation just on the slope here. This would be the slope hillside coming back up to grade here. As we make our way along our pathway here, as I mentioned before, our kind of iconic shade pavilion. On both sides of that pavilion, we have lawn picnic areas. And then just beyond that, we have some additional infiltration areas so that we can take some of the stormwater that's moving off of the field and pre-treat it prior to its discharge into Beaver Brook via cobble overflow structures here and here. We have another small little 23, which is another small depressed area, very similar to 18, with guide rail to prevent anybody from falling down into that hillside. And then the guide rail moves this way as well. We have another pathway as well, which moves into another opened micro floodplain area here and a small little gathering spot down there. Within the actual stream channel itself, the low flow channel would remain the same, but we'd be looking to add some cobble structures, riffles is what we call them, directly in front of these lower gathering spaces. These are important not only for fish, oxygenation of the water, but sound. You can imagine sitting in this picnic area here or making your way along this pathway and hearing the bubbling of the water moving through the riffle structures. also adding some white water into the stream channel. As we move our away along the walkway here, we have some of the other additional log seating elements, and then some additional pollinator, butterfly garden, bump out areas, which currently just exists as grass. And then in between these, we have some small little pocket areas. Depending on how things are going socially with coronavirus, we wanted to provide some kind of smaller areas where people could kind of get away from it all and don't have to be around other people. And so we have these 3 areas here that kind of mirror image the area, this little chill nook areas down here. Continuing on, as I discussed, our large basin sediment forebay area here. And we are adding some large shade trees along the property line here just to delineate our site from this adjacent site. Now, currently, this entire lawn area, as you know, feels like it's part of the park. Unfortunately, this lower area is all wetland, so any future development in this area, may be a little difficult. But without saying anything, it still can function very much as a place associated with the park, and maybe even a great place for people to bring their dogs to run around with these large shade trees delineating that area. Additionally, I want to mention that the location of our sediment forebay is adjacent to this existing wetland. So we want to, include some of the hydrology that's happening below grade between these 2 systems. Number 14 is essentially very similar to a created wetland system. And then lastly, in this concept, moving to this area, we have an open lawn space here that we thought would be a potential area for temporary tents that could be set up on game day, whether they're selling food or merchandise, or if people just want to set up tents and sit at the end of the field. This is an open lawn area just along our walkway here. So those are the elements of concept number 1. Okay, in concept number 2, we are coming in again and we're saying desired signage, wayfinding signage at Cheshire Trail to make people aware that they can have a very easy walk down Water Street and Carpenter Street to get to, Brad, a new parking area on our property. We'd be using the similar location coming just in off, where we would have 2-way flow moving in our main drive aisle here, going to a 1-way flow, wrapping around and coming out. In this concept, we could potentially have the area paved with asphalt or pervious asphalt, and then have pervious pavers in the parking area. So we kind of add an added stormwater element to this parking area, and we're just not proposing impervious surface into what is currently lawn. Once you park and or are dropped off, you enter 2 small little plaza areas. So these paver plaza areas would have benches in them. They'd have trees for shade just over them, and would be a great place. It's a decision node. So if you get dropped off, you step onto the plaza, and really you're panning around the entire park, figuring out, oh, where should I go? Where's the playground? Is John here yet? Let me text him. It's kind of, the decision area. 13 is also a really great location for food trucks. Food trucks can line up. You could essentially get 1, 2, 3, 4 food trucks in this area. And if need be, we can also expand this drop-off area so that you can envision food trucks while the game is going on and people are in lines or waiting in these 2 small plazas to get their food. As we move down and around here, 16 identifies the location of the bathroom facility in concept two, opposite of really where it was in the first concept, with a small little plaza that attaches into our multi-use trail running along this eastern edge of the park. Again, delineating parking spaces running along Carpenter Street with handicap parking stalls and an adjusted location and simplified entrance into the park where we would still maintain signage that identifies the name of the park rules, potential kiosk or information on the schedule of rugby, and a bike rack. And then along the parking here, we have a series of gateway banners, whether these are columns or flags or banners. Having them run along Carpenter Street here helps to brand the park. And then as you're walking or on a bike moving along the trail here, you would see these as you're moving and pass them, and it just, enliven the space a little bit. In this concept here, centered on the 50-yard line, we have an open-aired pavilion, not the bleachers. And so our thought on this is, one, an open-air pavilion in this location makes a great location, not only for spectators of different teams to gather, but it's also a great location after the game for both teams to gather and laugh and cheer and discuss, how hard this person got hit and so forth. On each side, anchoring the open air pavilion, we have two small picnic areas, as well as our log or stone seating, and then handicap accessible walkways to our bleacher areas, identified as 19 on this side and on this side. We'd have shade sail structures that shade the bleachers, but that also go over the multi-use trail. So as you are making your way around here, you're not on a separate trail, separate from the bleachers and all the spectators, but you move under it and are a part of it. Additionally, if there was lighting that's lighting these shade structures, you'd be moving underneath that light. So really interesting kind of activation going on here. Moving along our pathway 27 here, where our previous bathroom was, we have a small little handicap accessible picnic area with some larger shrub plantings around it and a very large playground element. At this point, you could decide whether you continue on the wide multi-use path, and at about this point, you start entering the understory of the existing canopy of trees. So this entire area here moves through the existing tree canopy. It would be very interesting to get some moonlighting way high up in those trees, shining down so that at night you have the shadowing of the branching pattern and foliage of the trees as you make your way along the northern portion of the path here. Or you could decide to take a left-hand turn on a smaller pathway that moves along the edge of field here and our proposed protective fencing from the field here. I could envision people standing on the lawn here with their arms on top of the fence here, watching the game with their kids playing just behind them. This pathway moves into an interesting feature in concept two. This is an elevated element part of this concept. These lines represent contours that move around and create this almost tear-shaped elevated platform identified as 31. If you make your way on this walkway here, you'd be walking upstairs to this elevated platform and a walkway that starts to slope down to this other pavilion node. If we make our way back up this walk, along this slope here, we'd have colorful lounge or Adirondack seating that would be built right into this lawn hillside. You could also just throw down a blanket and sit right on the lawn hillside as you're watching an event. And as we move over here, anchoring both sides of this staircase, we have large granite block amphitheater style seating for sitting and watching your kids playing on the playground or watching events. It also is an added play feature where you can see kids hopping down these and hopping up them while their parents are having lunch or family members are having lunch in this elevated platform here. On the back side of this, again, this is sloping down towards our walkway. We have shade trees planted and a series of steps that get you down to the walkway, which wraps around to number 35, which is our entrance node. When coming from Harrison Street down, this is your first identification of the fact that you're in the park, signage of what the rules are in the park, and what are the different elements that you can visit in the park. So we envision a kiosk here that would have a map that identifies all of the different things in the park. 36 is a small little gathering space where we could have potential hammocks that people can sit on. The hammocks could also be put up only during game days, taken down so that we don't have people sleeping through the night on these hammocks. And then this concept, we're doing some similar features in the stream channel by really taking this grade back and creating some of our micro floodplain areas, but we're modifying the low flow channel a tad. We're maintaining the existing low flow channel as it moves through, but we're doing some scarification to it. So we add another small channel in here. We add another small channel in here and another small channel in here. By creating those smaller channels, we're creating number 41, which are these small little islands. Now, for the most part, depending on the elevation of these islands, they could be underwater for the majority of time with just a little bit of a knoll with grasses on top of it sticking out of the ground. During low flow, the channels would be exposed, and during high flow, you wouldn't even see these islands. But during low flows, you would have access down to them where you could explore these islands. Kids can meander in the water down here on top of the islands, and maybe even there's stepping stones between the islands. We added another riffle feature here as well as down into this area. This walkway is down into the floodplain, makes its way back up to a boardwalk feature that meanders over number 44, which is our large sediment forebay. In concept 2, the existing stormwater pipes remain in their same location, are replaced with larger pipes, but empty out into this large forebay area that would be planted and vegetated and would have a spillway that goes down into Beaver Brook. And as I mentioned, the boardwalk going over them. So you could stand here, look down over all of the butterflies and bees and flowers, and then on to Beaver Brook and listen to the Beaver Brook running through the cobble bars here. Coming over the boardwalk here, we're back onto our pathway. No open air pavilion in this area, but a larger picnic or gathering or hammock seating area that in this concept relates more to the field and not to the stream. You can see this large buffer planting of flowering shrubs with overstory trees and flowering trees just beyond it as kind of a backdrop when you're sitting here looking out into the field area. We've added some small little plantings so that the multi-use trail doesn't feel like it's directly on lawn so that it moves through different vegetative elements. And as we move our way over here to the left, we have another area where we're coming and expanding the floodplain, creating that micro floodplain. And we have a small little lookout area here. So you can imagine this feature would be on posts you would walk off the trail and onto it, and you can look down and view the stream and this area number 43. As we move to the south here, we have another playground area. So in concept number one, all of our playgrounds were on the northern side of the field. In this concept, we're separating two playgrounds. So one is on the southwest, one is on the northeast. And in this playground feature, we have a tower element. And this tower element, once you get up to it, you can walk over to another tower element, which then looks out over onto the field. This tower is also on pilings or posts, and we have another small little rain garden detention area here so that water that is moving, sheet flowing on the lawn has an area to capture and infiltrate into the soil. This rain garden could also be connected via underground pipe to another small rain garden area on our property, which again is associated with the wetland. So we have that hydrologic connection with new landscaping and signage that teaches how important how important rain gardens are and what they're primarily used for. And as Andy said in one of our earlier conversations, that in fact, you as the homeowner can have one of these rain gardens at your house next to your driveway so you don't have that irritating flooding or erosion that is happening in your yard. Our walkway moves down, and you can envision walking underneath this bridge, looking back up with kids running back and forth, looking down, shouting down, and a walkway to accessible parking here. What's nice about this is if it's a cold day, if it's snowy, nothing is happening on the field, it's a great place, and the kids want to go onto the playground. Very easy parking, very easy ADA access right to this playground here. And then our path moves down to our plazas here. And that's concept number two.